We're going to be moving into Boulevard Park flooding study. And this is NPDES permit coordinator, SWM engineer, Dan O'Brien, and then Public Works Director, Maya Andrews. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening. So this is a big item and it's fairly complex. So we're going to walk through this kind of diligently, but try to cover as much as we can. We have a lot of things to be thinking about at the end. And I think we'll need some future meetings probably to talk about kind of next steps, but we'll walk you through it. Before we get started tonight, I wanted to show you this tool. What you see on your screen right now is not our presentation for tonight, but it is an online tool that presents the Boulevard Park flooding study. This is now live on the website, and the tool is called Story Map. And on the website, there are two versions. There's a desktop version and a mobile version, and both are linked on our project page. There's a link to the project page in your agenda packet, or you can go to the city's homepage and type in Boulevard Park flooding in the search, and you will find this the homepage for the Boulevard Park project, where you'll see these two links. So this is the desktop version in front of you. And what you see on the left is all of the text and all of the analysis and exhibits associated with the study. So that's what's happening on the left side of your screen. On the right side of your screen is an interactive map. And as you scroll through text on the left side, you'll see that the map changes. So they're moving the screen right now down through the text, and so you get a different map as you page down through it. So at the beginning, the maps are talking about kind of the existing conditions, and so they're showing information on that. But then as you progress through, you'll see different information. You'll see the solutions and the flooding extent. So Brianna's moving around on the map a little bit to show you those features. Another thing I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is if you zoom in on a map and you'll see these small stars, and the legend talks about the different kinds of stars. There's and you can scroll the legend as she's showing there. So keep in mind the legend is longer than what it is there. She's pulling it down to scroll it. And she's going to click on, I think, issue number 1 or 2 in the northern part of the reach there. And so she'll click on one of those yellow stars. Let's see, and that will come up, and what you may or may not be able to see this on your screen, but it describes the issue at that location. It describes the cause, and it also will have at the bottom, it'll show some photos of what's happening there. And to the right of the photo, there's a small triangle. You can see additional photos by clicking that triangle. And you can also click on the photos themselves, and it will enlarge the photo on your screen, which she's demonstrating now. And then you can close that out and go back to she's going to close that tab, and she goes back to this main page. And so you can click on all those different little stars. Some of the stars represent issues. The oranger ones just represent the different flood conditions. So you'll get different information depending on where you click. So this tool is available for the public. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you scroll all the way to the bottom on the text side of the screen on the left side, right there at the bottom, she's pointing to some stakeholder feedback. You click on that. And if you want to comment on one of the issue sites already, you can do that, or you can comment on anything else you want to comment on by selecting other and making comments. So we are interested in anybody who has flooding issues out there that either hasn't spoken to us or wants to add additional information. You can do that on the screen. You can upload a photo if you want to. And if you want to talk to us, you can leave your contact information there and we can get back to you. So all of that is available right now on the website, and we can bring that up more later if you like. In the meantime, we're going to jump into our presentation. So as you already know, with me tonight is Dan O'Brien, our stormwater engineer, Russ Gaston, our project manager from the consulting firm OTAC, as well as Shaylee Jane, who's also an engineering technician with OTAC. And Dan's going to start us off tonight with a little description of what led up to this study.
Thanks, Maya. So around 2017, the city began receiving reports of flooding and septic backups of 2 homes in the Boulevard Park neighborhood, along with concerns about a new development on 124th that involved clearing, fill, and alteration of a stream channel. In this picture, the two homes that reported flooding are in the generally upper left and lower right portions of the picture, shown being surrounded by the area of flooding that we found in our model, which we'll get to later. The development site is near the center of the image, just north of 124th Street. Other reports surfaced in addition of downstream modifications to the storm system, such as construction debris, garbage obstructing flow, and intentional blocking of a pipe. Staff began to investigate this and found several properties south of 124th had made unpermitted modifications to the grading in their backyards. It was later determined that they had placed fill and an 8-inch pipe through their backyards, significantly modifying an existing drainage course. Residents also indicate that historically there was a pipe in that location that had failed in recent years. Next slide. All of these events happened around the same time. The development, the pipe installation, the grading, the blockages and debris, and the flooding and septic backups. As you can see in these 2 photos, between 2016 and 2017, a large amount of earthwork was done, both at star number 2 and just below star number 3. These stars represent the most significant flooding we investigated, with numbers 1 and 3 representing the 2 homes that flooded, and number 2 marking the uncompleted development site. Earlier this year, council directed staff to perform a flooding study of this area. OTAC was brought on board to help find a solution to the flooding, as well as investigating possible solutions. Apologize. However, as the investigation progressed, it was determined that a correction of the flooding at these 2 homes could cause other properties downstream to experience more frequent flooding. OTAC conducted a high-level field survey, spoke with residents along the corridor, and then developed a hydraulic model to analyze the conditions and identify solutions. So now I'll hand it off to Russ Gaston from OTAC, who will walk through the survey, discussion, and modeling that explains the causes of the flooding and possible solutions.
Thanks, Dan. So Dan summarized kind of what our activities, how we address the study. This graphic shows the entirety of the neighborhood site. What you have in the orange outline is the area that contributes to the corridor that's shown in the white line. And then the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 represents where we had drainage complaints, and our models showed flooding. And in the shaded areas, we're going to go into more detail on each of these. The shaded areas represents where the area that we identified as at risk of flooding and that has had flooding. One thing I wanted to note on this before you go to the next one, Shelley. So our goals for the study, as we look at solutions, would be to eliminate flooding of the homes and septic systems and avoid impacts to downstream systems. So as we go through this, we're going to start with our observations and present some of our surveying and modeling results. And Shaylee's going to walk you through that. And then I'll talk about some of the conclusions that we came up with and what our recommendations are. Go ahead. And so with that, Shaylee, do you want to start talking about the flooding in the upper reaches, the northern end of the neighborhood? Shaylee?
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we go to the next slide, please? So what you see on the screen here are issue locations 1, 2, and 3. This is where there was the most severe flooding. Issue location 1 is Miss Janelli's property. That's at 12246 12th Avenue South. She's reported flooding as well as significant backup of her septic system. 2 is where there's 3 development parcels. This is where there's a little stream and there's a floodplain wetland, and that floods as well. And then 3, which is 1241 South 124th Street, there's significant flooding there as well. We'd like to sort of look at photographs of 1, 2, and 3, all the locations. And we'd like to start from the downstream end because that tells the story of how water backs up into locations 1 and 2. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So this is 1241 South 124th Street. As you can see, there's significant flooding here. If you look at the chairs in this picture, you can see that there's at least about 1 foot of water ponded around this house. One thing to note is this picture was actually sent to us by Miss Lee, and this is after the peak of the storm had passed, so the water may have risen a little bit higher than what's being shown in this photograph. And so what you see in the front of the house is the chairs with that 1 foot of water. And then if you look at that red circle and you look at those trucks in the back, you can see that the water's gone all the way up to 1 tire at least. In the back there also is the 8-inch pipe that basically drains this property. And we'd like to just draw our attention to that pipe. If we could go to the next picture, please. So this is the 8-inch pipe that leads from the 1241 South 124th Street property. As you can see, there's a chain link fence that's at the upstream end of this pipe. There's also a sort of small embankment on top of the pipe, which is about 2 or 3 pipe diameters, higher than the crown of the pipe. And then, as you can see, there's a lot of debris that's collected on the upstream end of the pipe as well. So something, and I will talk about this a little more, but water is coming down through South 124th Street through a 24-inch pipe, and then it basically gets diverted into this really small 8-inch pipe. And then to add to that, when there's debris that clogs it, the conveyance capacity reduces significantly, and because of the embankment, the backwater carries up, and we believe that this is a significant is the primary cause for the flooding at locations 1, 2, and 3. Russ, do you want to add anything to this, or?
Are you reading my face? I didn't hear you really say that. Note the amount of fill above the pipe. So that's an 8-inch diameter pipe that you see at the bottom, but there's at least 2 feet of fill above it, and that's important because it will continue to back up until it overtops that fill to move to the catch basin down towards the White House in the background. And so that backwater is significant to the upstream properties.
Right. If we move to the next slide, please, we can go through. So this is just a schematic of the hydraulics through issue locations 1, 2, and 3. So what you see is we did survey this, but this is just, this is just a sketch of, it's exaggerated and it's not to scale, but it's showing you what's happening. So at the leftmost end, you see the catch basin at 12th Avenue South, and then you see that there's this 12-inch pipe that goes into this open channel through issue location 2. Issue location 2, let me remind you, are those 3 parcels where there's the floodplain wetland in the stream. And then it goes into the 24-inch pipe under 124th Avenue South. And then it goes into an open channel. And then as you can see, the open channel seems to slope the other way. So instead of flowing to the right, the water sort of flows backwards again. And then there's the 8-inch pipe. And what you see on the top is a dashed line. That's that embankment that sort of keeps the water to the left side is basically what the screen is showing. A couple of things to note here. So the 3, so the pipe between the catch basin at 12th Avenue South all the way down to the culvert at 124th Avenue South, all of those are really flat. And then, like you see, the open channel through issue location 3, which is at 1241 South 124th Street, that one is reverse grade. So the flow is in the opposite direction and the 8-inch pipe is much smaller. than the 24-inch pipe. So we're going from a much larger pipe to a much smaller pipe. So those are really the things to note here. And like Ross was saying, you see the catch basin further downstream at house 12249. Water is sort of not, it's going to back up before it goes over the embankment and gets into that catch basin. So that backup is what we're seeing is flooding, the flooding locations 1, 2, and 3. If we could go to the next slide, please. So this is issue location 2. These are the 3 properties, 1230, 1242, and 1254 South 124th Street. And we'd like to see a few pictures here as well. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this shows the flooding. This is on the back side of the retaining walls, the side that's not looking at the street. And if you remember from Dan's pictures of the aerials, there was some woody debris put in the wetland floodplain on the banks of the stream. And as you can see, it looks like some of this debris is floating. The water has overtopped the silt fence. What you see in the back over there, the orange shed, that's actually the backside of Miss Lee's house. And this water flows back towards that house and also and has, I mean, we'll see pictures of that, but that location gets severely flooded. Another thing to note here is the water is stagnant and a lot of sediment probably drops out, and that clogs the conveyance further and worsens the flooding some more. So those are some of the things to note on this picture. If we could continue on, please. So this is a photograph we took when we went out into the field this year. And this is the retaining wall. As you can see, a lot of the grass has grown. The picture from before was after construction, but now, so this is in some ways positive because not as much sediment is mobile. But what is to be noted is these grasses can then clog up some of the pipes as well. But this is just showing you the current conditions of that property. And as you can see, the flow is to the left of that retaining wall. So that's where you were seeing woody debris in the previous picture.
And for orientation, the view is from on top of the wall, looking down into the stream channel and floodplain. So it's an opposite direction than what the other picture was.
Right. If we can continue on. So the next picture that we'll talk about is at issue location 1. This is Ms. Lee's property. If we can go to the next page. So as you can see, there's significant flooding here. This picture was again taken by Ms. Lee in Jan 2020. This was after the storm, the peak had passed. So the flood waters were reported to go all the way up to the top of her porch that you see in this picture. And as you can see, septic has backed up as well. And she's been facing significant septic backup these last few years, as she also mentioned in the public comment. So yeah. If we continue on. So what we did was we basically went out, looked in the field. So we first collected all the issues, and then we went out in the field, took some photographs. We also surveyed the alignment that Russ mentioned in that basin map. And then we set up a hydraulic model. And the hydraulic model is just basically pipes and catch basins. And we route water through those to try and see what are the flood prone areas. And then we try to match that with whatever pictures we had taken and whatever had been reported as flooding to make sure that our model was accurate. And these are some of the results from the model. So the things to focus on are at the top, you see the range of depths of flooding, and what you see at the bottom is hours flooded. As you can see at issue locations 1, 2, and 3, we're talking about flooding at very frequent events. So what you see is 2-year, 10-year, or 25-year just talks about the probability, the statistical probability of a storm occurring. So we're saying if a two-year is a very frequent storm, And so if you see flooding between 1 and 2 feet very frequently, and then at a larger storm, you can see between 2 and 3 feet. And then when you look down, you look at the hours flooded, you're talking about approximately 60 hours of flooding at these locations, which is significant. As you go further down, so when you look at issue locations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, you'll see that the depth of flooding is not as much unless it's a really big storm event. And the hours of flooding is also much lower for those issues downstream. Another important thing to note here is when we did start looking at it deeper, if we resolve flooding at issue locations 1, 2, and 3, without doing a more comprehensive solution, what will happen is the reds that you see would sort of move down. So all that water that's basically getting ponded at locations 1, 2, and 3 would get pushed down to locations 4 through 8. And so that's the reason that we had to look at a much larger solution. So these are, I think, the main takeaways from these couple of slides, Russ.
Can I add one more thing?
Mhm.
2 things, actually. So number 1, the duration is really important. And the reason is these results are based on a single event. But when you have flooding that lasts 60 hours, such as we saw in 60 hours, you may get what's called a piggyback. And that is a storm starts, it finishes, it rises up to the level it's going to, and then you get another storm. That storm is added on top of the first one. So the drawdown is quite important. And this represents the second point, the 8-inch pipe being clean. But so either any debris in that 8-inch pipe or frequent piggyback storms would make this flooding depths a little bit higher than what you see here. In fact, it was reported in the 2020 event that there was several, and it got up higher than the 2 to 3 feet. Okay, Shaylee, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what you see is, so we took the results out of the hydraulic model, and what you see here just shows you the area that gets flooded at these locations. So the pink is basically depicting the area that would get flooded under the 2-year storm, and then the purple is showing the 25-year storm. Again, 25-year storm is just a storm that has the probability of occurring once in about 25 years. So that's a lower, the probability of that storm is lower than the 2-year, which is what you see as the pink. What we're seeing here is that the primary cause of flooding, we believe, or the model also shows, is the 8-inch pipe that you see in the red over here, which backs up like we were showing on the hydraulic profile. And that backup continues all the way into properties, into issue locations 2 as well as 1. Russ, were you adding something?
No.
Okay.
I'll add something, Shaylee.
Okay.
I just want to emphasize that. So think about that 8-inch pipe, and the city's pipe is 24 inches. So that 8-inch pipe, all that water coming through the city's pipe that hanging around in that area in the upper half of the picture comes down. The other thing you have to think of is the city's pipe. I don't think I can do this in the screen very well, but 24 inches, the 8-inch pipe is not below that. It's up high as far as elevation. And so it's not able to pick up everything out of that city pipe. And so, yes, there's going to be, I know there's been comments made about the city's pipe having sediment. The city's pipe has sediment because it's all backing up and it's sitting there, and that allows it ponds, and as they say, it becomes stagnant, so it's not moving, and so it allows all that sediment to settle down. For what it's worth, we are cleaning that pipe regularly. It was the 24-inch was cleaned recently, but it's not really going to matter because that 8-inch pipe can't carry that amount of water, and so. And the fact that it's been built up and filled in the area of the 8-inch pipe, which is the red pipe at the bottom half of the screen, causes all of that backup up there. So,
and if I could add that the pink, which represents a 2-year event, or it represents less than a 2-year, an annual event, or less when there's piggyback situation that I described before. So these represent a single event with a clean 8-inch pipe, but with the debris and sediment that Maya and Shaylee talked about, it could make the flooding upstream a little bit worse than what we show here.
And Russ, I'd like to also add something that hopefully you can speak to, but first, before we get to that, the 8-inch pipe too, remember how easy it is to plug an 8-inch pipe. I mean,
Yeah.
you take a very big stick. And in fact, during one of these events, one of the neighbors found something in the 8-inch pipe, a very large, as I recall, stick or something that had gone all the way through the pipe. But that takes up a good amount of the capacity of that pipe when you get something in there. So that 8-inch pipe is a problem. I also want to point out, and this is where Russ, I might need your help, but Russ's team modeled and looked at the development that has happened at those 3 parcels. And they're not seeing that as being a significant factor. That was built to accommodate holding a certain amount of water. That area there that was built as a floodplain was developed as such. It has woody debris in it to benefit the biology and the environment. But if it could flow properly as it gets to the 8-inch pipe, I think, Russ, is it fair to say you don't think that development has impact on the flooding that we're seeing?
No, it took a small amount of storage, but you got to realize the volume of the water far exceeds. It's not the height of that storage, it's the amount, how much fill was there in the old floodplain that was there. And that's really small, but as long as you have that 8-inch pipe and piggyback events that keep stacking up on it, it doesn't matter how big of an area you have up there, it will catch up eventually. So that 8-inch pipe is for sure the primary cause of the flooding upstream of that pipe.
Can I ask a question? So who owns the 8-inch pipe?
So the 8-inch pipe was, well, I should look to Dan to this, but it crosses 4 different properties there. And just to be clear, I don't know if we started with this, but all of this pipe, somebody asked this question, public or private, and I'm going to speak to it a little bit more later, but this is all private pipe on private property. And while people may not know it's their pipe, it's their pipe. So the pipes on your property are in fact yours unless the city owns or has an easement. In this case, we don't have any rights along this corridor. The only place the city has ownership is at the culvert crossing 124th. And the other thing I need to note, and this is another thing that I think they're going to get into in the next slide, is throughout this corridor, people have done a variety of different things, not just here, but a vast majority of the properties over the next several blocks, and not maybe the current owners, but in the last decades, as you look, have done things in this area that carries the water that's affected the flow. Now our current regulations are a little more strict, but we would still have to recognize that things were happening. But you can't block the flow, natural flow through your property, but it's been done over the years. And this is just one of the things that was unpermitted. The city didn't know about. I honestly can say that I don't think the property owners understood when they did it, that they were impacting. And in fact, there's been some talk that I think they may have even thought they were helping, not understanding the elevations and the amount of fill they put in. So, but it is technically owned by the 4 property owners that it sits on today.
And there was some recent discussion on next door and apparently communication with the city. Is that about some wetlands clearing, some piece of equipment that got stuck in the wetlands and had to be pulled out? And I was just wondering if that was the same issue area too.
I can speak to that. That's in a different part of the city. That's
Okay.
off of 116th and 1st.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Sorry.
Shaylee, do you want to continue on to the next slide?
Sure. So yeah, this just to continue on, the model is consistent with the photographs, what was reported, and what we got is anecdotal information from, we did speak to quite a few residents who reported the flooding. So our model seems to simulate whatever we saw in the field pretty well. Our main draw from the model is that we have an undersized, poorly placed 8-inch pipe that's causing stormwater to back up in the northern end of the basin. So that's near issue locations 1, 2, and 3. And replacing that 8-inch pipe without other improvements would result in increased flooding in the south end of the basin. If we can continue on. So now I'd like to draw your attention to issue locations 4 through 8. So these are downstream of this 8-inch pipe. So water's been backed up, and now we're looking south of that pipe. And this is basically nuisance flooding. And we call it nuisance because it's not flooding any structures. So it is flooding parking areas, a shed, people's backyards. Although you see that there's large pink and purple polygons, it also is not very deep flooding. So we're talking about a few inches maybe in some of these locations. And these areas are where if only the 8-inch pipe got replaced, these areas would flood some more. And like Maya was saying, the causes of flooding in a lot of these locations is because of landscaping, grading, fill, debris and sediment getting trapped in a lot of the private pipes. There are some undersized pipes, and there are also pipes that are reverse slope, which means the flow is in the opposite direction than it's meant to be. Where you see issue location 4, for example, there's a bunch of, this conveyance, there's open channel, but then the conveyance size changes as you go along the property. So there's a lot of these little problems that have caused a lot of localized flooding is what we saw in the field as well as in the model.
So to emphasize what she just said too, 1, 2, and 3. Well, first I want to point out 1, 2, and 3. The people who did below them, the people who did the 8-inch pipe that Councilmember Tosta just asked about, they've reached out to us, at least one of them, and probably more. Dan could speak to that, but they've reached out to us because we have spoken with them now that this has happened. We discovered this happened. We let them know we think this is a concern, and they are looking to us for help. They said, well, what can we do? Can we just go take it out? The problem we see now is the last couple of years, areas 4 through 8 aren't flooding as much as they typically flood because that 8-inch pipe helped these people out in the southern end. And so now if they remove that, these people are going to experience new flooding. Some of them who may be new owners and haven't seen it before are suddenly going to see new flooding. And so that's part of why we're looking at a more comprehensive solution. And we're going to talk about some of those alternatives. The other thing I should mention is that again, this is nuisance flooding through here. So we're not getting it in homes, although it does get into sheds and some covered areas. And then just to emphasize, the 4 things on the screen you see right there are insignificant to probably the individual property owners, but very significant to this problem in that there's some extravagant landscaping and there's, again, as she said, pipes that were put in going the wrong direction, and so that causes a backup. There's a lot of different things going on in here, and a lot of people, and again, maybe not today's owners even, some of this was done years and years ago. Some people may not have even known that this stuff was out there, but there's a lot of things that are slowing the water down from moving through here nicely. So let's go to the next slide.
Russ, I'll hand it over to you.
You're muted. Sorry. Still muted.
You're muted, Russ.
Sorry, I was on mute. Could we go back one slide just for a second? I wanted to point something out at the last. You see at the bottom around flooding location number 8, that, if you remember from the table, is very shallow. It's a parking lot, a lot of paved area. So when it floods, it sheet flows out, and it's not a long duration. There was flooding that was noted by the people in that area, but not as extensive as we see here. So the bigger, it could get worse if there was more water delivered here. the parking lot, because it has nowhere to go, it just sheet flows into the surrounding areas. So with that, I'd like to talk next about some of the alternatives and then that we evaluated and the ones that we selected. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk through this long list, but I did want, this is in the story map and you can read the details of what each alternative was, what were the key elements, how well was it modeled, and then what were our conclusions and our recommendations. Ultimately, of the 16 that we evaluated, we selected 2 that we considered to be viable. And what does viable mean? It means it eliminates flooding in the neighborhood. It doesn't move a flooding problem downstream, and then it's cost effective. Well, they're expensive. So of the 2, I'm going to talk in more detail about the 2 in green. The one higher up is alternative 9. I'll describe what that is and what our recommendations were. And then alternative 13 is the lower one. As we evaluated, these are the things that we were considering: effectiveness, how much property is required to implement a solution, what are some the risks, the permitting and environmental impacts that could be expected, and then just how cost effective is it compared to other alternatives. Can we go to the next slide? So alternative 9, let me orientate you what's in this graphic. The dashed line is where it's the drainage corridor, and along this drainage corridor and the dashed lines would have conveyance improvements to the wetlands that's just downstream of South 136th Street. The other key element of this, in the middle of the graphic, you'll see in a green circled area, detention for area 9. That's a 9 acre feet. It wouldn't have to be as wide as this. There's a lot of different configurations, but it's really sizable and quite expensive. We ended up not, this is a viable solution, so it is one that we could recommend, but we didn't recommend it because it's more expensive than the alternative I'm going to talk about next. And it also doesn't create a lot of opportunities for environmental enhancements and environmental uplift. Can we go to the next one? So this is alternative 13, and you'll notice the white dots, which represents the conveyance improvements. It's the same extent. In fact, in the park on the east side of Des Moines Memorial Drive is that would be an open channel possibly where you can do some environmental enhancements. In pink, down at just north of South 136th Street, we put a detention facility in there. We may not need it, but if there are any environmental impacts, it outfalls just south of South 136th Street into a stream and wetlands. We did a hydroperiod analysis of that wetlands, and it appears we could meet the guidelines for discharging to a wetlands from a volume of water that gets there. So that's ideal, but we may want to, we included in the cost, perhaps doing some enhancements to the stream corridor through there and possibly the wetlands if mitigation is required. And so this is the recommendation that we recommend because it does allow enhancements from Des Moines Memorial Drive all the way to just upstream of Tub Lake in terms of daylighting, a pipe system to a channel, and then doing some stream enhancements south of 136 and some wetland enhancements. And this is quite a bit cheaper than alternative 9 that I previously discussed. Now, if we can go to the next slide, I'll just, this looks blank, but if you look at when Shaylee presented the red and the yellow and the white with the dash in them, these are all white dashes because in either alternatives, 9 or 13, there wasn't any flooding problems at all through the neighborhood. Can we go to the next slide? Talk a little bit about cost. This isn't a cheap solution either. This is 13. It's cheaper, quite a bit cheaper than alternative 9. The total cost is $12.4 million dollars. And early on, we would need to, get the design, property rights, and permitting started with a 30% if you chose this. And then later, I'll talk about schedule as it gets into construction. Then there would need to be construction management as well as construction cost itself. Can we go to the next slide? Unless there's any questions on this. So here, the total time that we would expect from today, if you selected to move forward with this alternative, is that it could take 3 to 5 years. And that's to have everything built and in place. We start with the design, and as the design reaches 30%, we would initially, so design would take 12 months, but as you get to 30%, which generally is about 6 months, then you would start right-of-way negotiations and permitting, start talking to the permitting agencies. And so the right-of-way could take another 12 months in itself, depending on how many, how much negotiations are required, and permitting could take 6 to 12 months. Ultimately, the design, right-of-way, acquisition, and permitting about 18 months. And that would get us into bid and construction, which could take another 12 to 24 months. And that's where we come up with 3 to 5 years. What's not really emphasized here though is initially, and Maya's going to talk about this next, before you even start with the design, because this is quite expensive, establishing the funding, whether it's grants or other sources, that may need to precede even this. And so can we go to the next slide? And
Okay.
and Maya.
Russell, and I have a question from Councilmember Schilling here.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councilmember Schilling.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I do not understand how this would take 3 to 5 years. I'm sorry. Can we go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So I can speak to that a little bit.
Okay,
And
but 1 second, Maya. 1 second. Hold on. Brian, you and I have had conversations about permitting and it taking forever. Why would it maybe take a year? Isn't the city directed? What does right of way mean? Does that mean it'll take 12 months for us as a government to say we want to take over that? Well, but that's absurd. A year? I need to understand the actual reasons why something takes a year to do.
I'd be happy to do that. I was going to talk to it a little bit next, but I'll do that right now. So let's do right away first. So in this case, you're going to need 40 approximately, because all of this is on private property, about 40 rights from different people, property rights. What the rights are will depend on what we decide, but as a bare minimum, we'll need easements so that the city owns the pipe for the long run and would then maintain it. So the idea is if this were determined by council to be a public project, we would own and maintain that pipe. Now, you will have people who are willing to provide their property because they want this project and they're getting flooding and they want it to move forward. It's very unusual, and I've done a lot of projects with a lot of right-of-way acquisition for you to get willingness by everyone, especially when probably 3/4 of those 40 people, only about a dozen are really experiencing this problem. Most of those others aren't. And so they don't have to willingly sell us their property or sell us rights to their property or allow us right down the middle of their property. So first of all, to do that, you have to be willing to use your condemnation authority. And I've done this on, I think both City Manager Wilson and I have done projects on 99 in working for other cities. I worked for Des Moines, he worked for Federal Way. And I can tell you buying those 1-foot slivers for every parcel, it takes a long time. And if we were lucky enough to get federal money, there's timelines on that. You have to provide them in order to respond to your offers. You have to, by requirements of funding, make multiple offers. And it's also going to be a requirement of condemnation when you go to court. And yeah, Garmin's I see his hand raised now and he's going to step in here. There is a whole process you go through for public use and necessity. You have to get the court to declare that. There's a process for once they've done that, then you have to file your condemnation stuff. And when you go through that, you then have to go through a period where you try to negotiate with them and the judge will ask you to. How am I doing, Garmin? You want to jump in here?
I mean, you're giving a very detailed response, which I think is hopefully helpful for Councilor Schilling. But the reality is setting a value even for a very small portion of someone's, frankly, real property, that takes time. And coming to an agreement, frankly, is not a guarantee, certainly not when you're talking about multiple properties. And frequently you end up in court just to determine what is the fair market value of the slight portion of their property that you need to have for a quote unquote public purpose. This is not something that happens quickly under, maybe if you only had one. And those were the only people who were the folks being flooded. They have every reason to work with you and to come to an agreement as quickly as possible. The lady who comes on very, very frequently to speak, I believe Miss Lee, if it was just hers, we probably could find a way to come to an agreement and get this done. But this is not that situation. And unfortunately, you also have people who will take advantage of an opportunity, of what they think is an opportunity, and they will attempt to gouge the city for, despite the fact that you're taking a 1/100th of their portion of land, not even to use it above surface, but to use it subsurface, just so that you can run a pipe and then maintain that pipe periodically to make sure that it's functioning correctly. It is not a quick process. We wish that it was the type of process that you're describing, but that's just not what happens.
No, and I appreciate the in-depth expertise and answer, and I of course understand the reasons why some of these things take a while. But 3 to 5 years, this just seems absurd to me, since this problem has been going on for decades. And I'll just be frank, this is why people lose faith in government, because we'll say 3 to 5 years, and then they'll come back, and it'll be delayed, and it'll have cost overruns, and then it'll be 8 to 10 years. So I want to make sure that we don't make a bunch of promises to help all these people out, and then it take 10 years. I'm sorry, I just get a little frustrated with this, because this is what I fear, making people lose faith in our ability to solve problems for them, is that it takes years to finish.
I really
want Maya.
Oh, go ahead.
If I could, just for one moment, I'm obviously, I don't think anyone who is involved in this wants for this project to have cost overruns, to not be effective, to discourage the community. I mean, we're here with you every meeting. We hear the people who are voicing the concerns. We're seeing the photographs, the pictures. I know some of the councils have gone out to the locations and walked the sites and so forth. But the reality is, you can look at those pictures and you can see no one should have to live like that. So there's no question about that. But let's come back to, as a practical matter, even outside of the legal aspect of it, but just as a matter of science and preparation. This is not a situation where we could go and open up the ground and just start dropping in new things without actually studying what will happen here. We have to do that kind of work. Even if you figured out a way and everyone agreed to the right-of-way stuff, it's going to take you time. The actual digging, the grading, and whatever the technical stuff is that OTAC and an engineer like Maya would be going through, those are not things that happen immediately. Now, am I saying that this should turn into the 8 to 10 year project that you just described? Of course not. We don't want that, if for no other reason. That means that it's going to be far more expensive than what we're trying to do it for, which is already expensive to begin with. But I think it's important for the community to know that while a counselor can be passionate about the situation, the counselor also understands this right here we're looking at trying to do this as quickly as possible, recognizing and setting realistic goals for how this can be done. And if we were to come in and tell the folks who just spoken today in public comment and who've been here on previous occasions, oh, we'll have this done for you in 6 months, they will be more disappointed when we find at 6 months, we're nowhere near getting to fixing their problem.
Okay, thank you, Garmin. I appreciate that. I'll just say this. I'll just say my last point then to Brian. Then, for the next couple years, can we coordinate with the King County Flood Control Board and county money and our federal partners to see what kind of assistance we can get for the next few years, and to see how we can help mitigate what's going to happen for the next few years?
I'm going to speak to that a little bit. And if you can just
thank
bear
you.
with me a little longer. I'm sorry about that, but I want you to know that I share in your concerns and frustrations, but I also come to this with a lot of experience in trying to do these kind of projects. And I work with a lot of peers in other cities who do these kind of projects, and purchasing 40 pieces of property is difficult. Your community members have rights, and we have to follow the process for getting those. And you just mentioned federal money. Federal money will stretch this out. Their rights are much more significant when we start using federal money. And to get 40 pieces of right-of-way, and I'm not saying this because I want the project to go fast too. I understand what you're saying, and I feel your pain, and I felt it over the years in doing these kinds of projects. I am saying this because honestly, 12 months for 40 parcels, it really will depend on whether those people are willing or not. If they're not, they can stretch this process out, and there's no way for us to accelerate that legal process. So this isn't in your control or my control. If it was, we'd be going along, and I'm sorry about that, but that's what the law provides for going through those right-of-way acquisition processes, is it takes time. And then I wanted to touch base on permitting also. The permitting is also, your city permitting will go fast. What will not go fast, and I can't promise it, is Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, and Ecology. And we can, I know Russ is here, he can give you examples of projects that have taken over a year. The bridge project, it was delayed for almost a year because of the permitting process, not within our control. We definitely, along the bridge project, we reached out to our congressional leaders and asked for assistance in accelerating that along, but we still had to go through it. I even at the end was willing to jump through ahead of that permitting process to see what actions they might take. We have to consult with the tribes. They have a lot of requirements. That's going to happen here. 6 to 12 months. Here again, that's actually an ambitious number for what I've experienced. And I'm not saying that to be governmental and make you think it's long. I'm saying that to tell you what I've been through over all these years of doing these projects and experienced personally, and how long it takes to do that. If there's a way, and I can tell you, I mean, if there's a way to make it go faster, you have a public works director who is willing to push those buttons to make it go faster. And City Manager Wilson, did you want to comment?
Thank you. I, support the timeline that's been presented. I know I believe it's aggressive, the time frame that's been put forward, but I also hear, Councilmember Schilling, if I'm hearing you correctly, we have 2 property owners right now who are at great risk. And so it'd be interesting to think of some alternatives for those 2 property owners in the interim time period. And that could be something that we can explore, once we have a plan to go forward here. Because my understanding is those are the 2 properties where people are having significant flood events in their respective homes. So that's certainly something that Maya and I have talked about, and we can certainly look into it, and that may address some of your concerns on behalf of those property owners, because as you state, 3 to 5 years when your house is flooding every year is unacceptable.
And I meant, when I said federal money and assistance, I meant for that reason, not necessarily for the construction and the project, because Maya did say earlier already that would slow it down. So I just mean for these interim years when their houses are going to be underwater for 3 to 5 years.
So if I could go through the next slide, a lot of what we've just talked about, I'm going to touch base on, and I'd love to get through this slide and then come back because I think there's going to be a lot of questions around a lot of this stuff. So give me a chance to quickly go through this. So first of all, public or private project. As I mentioned before, this is private pipe on private property, and it's there because, and it exists today because of various modifications that private owners have done over 50 years. Might not be the people there today, but it truly began as a private issue, private pipe, privately maintained. However, I think we all in this room agree that it's going to be really difficult for private owners to take this on, right? Because it requires the cooperation of 40 owners, and private owners don't have that ability to have condemnation authority. We also, I think many of you might have noticed that our solution extends into the city of SeaTac, and it's also on both city of SeaTac property as well as some port-owned property. And so it'll require work with them. I have reached out to SeaTac. They're aware we're talking about this. They are somewhat, I guess, comfortable with the concepts we've presented, but there's definitely some negotiations to be done there, which is another thing in the timeline I didn't list, is the time it'll take to negotiate with those two entities who have to be willing partners in this project. Condemnation, so we've talked about that. You can't do a project of this size without authorizing condemnation because one person can stop your project. And so because we don't have a way to get around them in these low spots. So that's something we need to be thinking about. Flooding frequency and type. So this is what these next few things are kind of what City Manager Wilson was just talking about. And I think Councilmember Schilling, this may be a direction you want to start thinking about. So first of all, what flooding problem are we solving? This is 2 homes. This isn't a whole bunch of homes. My fear about the fact that it's, and I don't mean to say this for those of you who flood, it's horrible, I get that, but what I'm going to tell you is the flood control district, their focus is on flooding of structures. They don't give out a lot of money for flooding yards and flooding parking lots. And so a $12 million project for 2 structures, I don't know that they will give us that kind of award. It might be a smaller award. So that's one thing we're up against when we work with the flood control district, is it's 2 homes. The other thing is, so we have, what's acceptable flooding? Are yards acceptable, or houses? We don't like the houses, obviously, but do we allow the yards? The other thing is what Russ presented is a 25-year storm. So keep in mind that when we have a 100-year storm, which we've all seen in the last 10 years, they will still flood. So this doesn't, it doesn't take care of all floods. It takes care of a lot of floods, the frequent flooding. So I guess we need to start getting our arms around the next one, which is, are there options that involve property acquisitions? And this is what I'm most interested in hearing based on what Councilmember Schilling said, is when we looked at it, we were looking for a solution that solved the entire length, right? And so we preliminarily, and you said, let's get all the flooding taken care of, and let's try to focus our work in an area that's the area we need for our pipe. But another way you could look at this is, are there properties we could buy that flood? We would own that flooding. They wouldn't be exposed to it anymore. That would cost us a significantly less amount than the $12 million, right? So we might be able to spend $3 or $4 million on just buying some properties. And then we could use those properties to do some detention. Now, I have to be cautious with this. This would require some additional modeling. I did not want to look at doing full property acquisitions and buying houses without talking to you first, but it is something you should consider because 1, it might be cheaper, and 2, it will solve some of the bigger problems. It's not going to solve all the what we call nuisance flooding, which is the non-structural flooding, the yards. But there are some upgrades that we still might be able to do that could solve some of that too, if we incorporate some of these properties into detaining some water on those sites, just saying, okay, it's going to stay there, that water, and then we're just going to do some minor upgrades. And so that is the one, again, I didn't feel comfortable going out and doing that kind of research yet, but that may be something you're leaning toward based on what you've heard tonight. And that's just part of what I wanted to present to you. So capacity for future development, I'm not as worried about, but it is something we keep in mind. One of the advantages to getting the whole corridor done is, we can allow for a big enough pipe to carry enough water to allow for future development. However, this area, I've talked with Community Development Director McLean. This area is zoned residentially. A small portion of it is commercial intersection. The portion that is commercial intersection is already fairly impervious. And so I don't see in the next years, unless you change how you want Boulevard Park to look, I don't see that changing a lot as far as impervious surface. Things may come and go and get replaced, but not likely to grow a ton. And so I think it has reasonable capacity now, unless you change the land use. And then I also have a note in here, we should be thinking about any interim changes we might need in development regulations, if we need to make sure that anybody who does develop in that area either doesn't create new impervious or is able to accommodate our planned improvements for a project of whichever type of project we work on. And we could just focus on this slide. Let's pop to the last slide just for a second. Maybe we'll come back to this. But so some of the questions tonight for next steps I want to reach out to you about are, how much public input would you like us to do at this point? We have connected with a lot of the people who are flooding. They have the opportunity now to reach out to us through the website to tell us where they are. We feel like the model is in pretty good shape. And so I'm wondering, kind of, do you want us to do some additional public input work? It's awkward to do in COVID times, but the other thing we could do is offer to have individual meetings with people who reach out to us through the website. We could send out a letter potentially to everybody out there and say, if you'd like to have a meeting, we'll set up a Zoom meeting with you individually and talk through your specific concerns so that we're making sure our model's good. So that's one thing. Two is public versus private projects. It feels like the council has already kind of said this is a public project. Three, do you want us to look into an additional alternative that talks about buying potentially a home or full parcels? That would take us some time, but we could do that and come back to you, model it so we know for sure that we can handle the stormwater on those parcels and still relieve a lot of it. And then the last one is, how are we going to fund it? Couple things I'm just going to say really quick to finish this out. So yes, there are potentials with the flood control district. There are maybe some with emergency management that we're already looking into. And there may be ARPA ones too. We may be able to do some water quality work that could qualify for ARPA, and we can look into that. None of them are likely to give you the 12 million, but they might give you some lesser amounts. And so certainly able to look in that. And the other thing I don't want to forget is the sewer district. Valley View Sewer District does want to do improvements out here and put in sewer. They reached out to me. They, between the two of us, if we partner together, we're going to be more eligible for grants. And so we have said, yes, we will apply for grants with you, doing the sewer and stormwater simultaneously. So they're already willing to work with us, and I'm sure that's desired by both parties. Okay, so now if you want, we can go back to that last slide too and start answering all your questions.
I'm gonna recognize Deputy Mayor Marks and then Councilmember Costa. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Mata. Oh boy. So I actually, if you wouldn't mind going to that next slide, actually, I think that would be, yeah, my comments were going to speak to that exactly. So I think personally, I think it would be good to do the outreach to Boulevard Park residents and offer the one-on-one as an area of the city that has not been as engaged with. I think folks would really appreciate having the opportunity to share their unique circumstance. I think you're going to get that anyway. If there was a larger group like info session, a lot of individual questions, so it might be worth it just to do the one-on-ones. In terms of the additional alternative of potentially acquiring those properties, I think it would be wise to look into that. I'm speaking as someone whose property, it was actually on the map as one of the ones where there might be a potential wetland. When I moved here and lived here for a few years in Boulevard Park at 12449 on 14th Avenue South, our whole property became lakefront property multiple times a year and completely ruined the majority of my husband's Army veteran materials, uniforms, pictures, photographs. It went into the garage, went under our house. So I think just it is at that serious enough stage that we need to look into all potential alternatives. I like that we want to work with Valley View as well for potential grant opportunities. But that's where I'm at, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of the council.
Go ahead, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, and thank you for the comprehensiveness of this, Maya. I mean, obviously, I think every council member has been out and walked around on these properties, and it, sort of scratching our head as to what the options might be. I would also say, any other members of the public that feel that they haven't been heard and have a perspective or have a stake in this, we should do whatever we can to try to gather their input. I am very supportive of looking at other alternatives. And it seems to me that there are some opportunities here to think about this in a creative way. As Deputy Mayor Mark said, she's had lakefront property. I mean, maybe we have a lake that, there's houseboats. I mean, just to be sort of totally out there, that there are ways to address this that would create more green space and wetlands and habitat that would be valuable for other purposes. So I would definitely be supportive of looking at that and finding and ways to involve the community in that conversation. And then also the Valley View and putting in sewers, I think, is always a good idea in a developed area such as we have. The septic systems that exist are from long ago when properties were somewhat more rural, and many of us, even in our very developed areas, originally had septic systems until the sewer districts decided that they would put in the infrastructure. So I think Valley View, looking at what they can do there, but I do think, considering what could alternatively be done here that would be in the long run beneficial and potentially less expensive from an infrastructure development and maintenance perspective.
All right, any other council? Go ahead, Councilman Moore, and then Councilman Rochelle.
Thank you. First of all, I did want to say thank you to everyone who put the time and effort into bringing this report to us. I mean, it's been a long time coming, and I know a lot of people have been waiting, some of them in more dire circumstances than others, but I think that it's great that we're moving forward on this. I certainly would love to hear more feedback from our community, from those impacted. I think that as much outreach as we can get, to solicit the opinions and input of the people in the area that we're talking about here would be prudent. And I think that they deserve to be heard. And I think that's been a concern of theirs, at least from what I would take away from the feedback that we've gotten so far. I do want to move quickly on this project, but I think that the first step should be contacting people. I think the ability to offer the option of one-on-one meetings is amazing. I think online feedback options is great. I think if we want to set up community meetings, town halls, anything that we can do to solicit feedback would be awesome. I also am very, very interested in what kind of proposals are available. Brian mentioned earlier, for helping the people who are facing the most severe flooding during the times when their homes are unlivable. So I'd love to hear more about that, and potentially take action on that. We are getting into the wet season right now, so if there's the ability for us to move on that very quickly, then I think that would be preferable than waiting for another year or waiting for several more months while these homes become flooded and unsafe and uninhabitable. So I would ask that any options to help support these homeowners and residents that are about to be underwater or already, looking at treading water. I think that if we can bring that forward as quickly as possible, I would be very interested in that. And I would certainly prefer that, and I'm sure they would too. So
Go ahead, city manager. I'm gonna go to Councilmember Schilling.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore, I just want to be clear in terms of you are supportive of us exploring alternatives to the plan that we talked about today. And I want to be, clear about the fact that it would be in terms of potentially identifying properties and another alternative that you would be supportive of that. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is that if we can provide any kind of assistance to the homeowners and residents that are currently facing the flooding now, so if there's any support that the city can provide, I'm not sure what you might have had in mind, but my thoughts are.
Yeah, I think that's something that's not what I was referencing.
Okay.
But it is something we can certainly explore. But that is something that because these are private properties. So I would ask for your support to explore the alternatives. And if I hear you correctly, you're supportive of that.
Sure. But I also would like to see any options that we have available to help people right now. And I get that it's private property, but also, I mean, it's our job to help serve our people and keep them safe. And at this point, their homes are no longer safe. So what can we do to alleviate the suffering they're dealing with right now? What options do we have? So anything you can bring forward on that would be amazing and much appreciated.
Thank you.
Councilmember Schilling.
In that regard, Brian, I think potentially something that looks like the utility tax assistance program, but in sort of like a flood assistance payment program of some kind that would come out of partnerships or I just literally just thought of that right now in terms of what the utility tax assistance. So it's not really thought through on my end, but that just came to my head when Councilmember Moore was saying what she was saying. But the point I wanted to make was back to some of the processes that Maya was talking about in terms of what happens at the state and federal level for permitting and processing. And I think going forward too in this process, to include in our legislative and federal lobbying efforts, identifying those specific processes, and then going to our state and federal delegations and saying, can you sign a letter to head of such and such agency, whatever committee, and say, this takes forever for cities, we need to shrink the time, it takes too long to do things. So I saw some head nodding from Maya. I think that would be good for us to do as for our state and federal lobbying efforts, so that we can go with specifically identified processes that hinder a more quick process, and say to the state and federal government, hey, work faster.
I know Maya has some examples of where we could seek assistance in that regard, and we can certainly do that. I do, if we were to pursue this other alternative with the properties, that is a process that I'm not, as Maya mentioned, we've been through this quite a few times in different jurisdictions. It's tough and takes time. And so I'm not sure. And oftentimes that responsibility falls on the cities for their staff and to the negotiation and the unfortunate time when you can't come to agreement and you have to rely on condemnation. But that's a great suggestion. Well, we can certainly talk to Mike and Lisette about potential to impact these state and federal requirements that really we spend a ton of time trying to get projects through.
Great.
Thank you, Councilmember Schilling. Hey, Councilmember Schilling, if you can come up with some kind of solution on the federal, I think the general contractor would love you. Not love you too as a contractor. It becomes a pain. But talk a little bit about buying the homes. I think it's important, as we know that global warming is real. We've seen just the weather just a couple of days ago, just this morning, just last night, with the amount of rain that we're getting, saying that it's going to be La Nina, so we're going to expect a very wet winter. But there's also funding I know out there for wetlands. There's funding out there for urban open space. Also, I think there should be a study to see what homes are going to be impacted that are severely impacted today, knowing that, private, I think it becomes a slippery slope with private property and city. I can tell you, I'm of the mindset, this is my property. I mean, I can understand, well, if there's a problem, of course, I'm gonna want the city to come in and help me, 'cause I don't have the funding for it. But at the end of the day, I decided to buy my home. I decided to buy it where I wanted it. And so there's some, some property rights that I have as a citizen and as a American citizen and being born in this country. And that's why my parents came to this country, making sure that we were protecting those rights. I also think one-on-one meetings would be great. Also, where somebody could go in, and I love what you did with the interacting tool and kind of knowing where the problems are at. Now, what I saw from this presentation, doesn't matter even if we do get the 2 homes and 3 homes that look like may flood, or maybe even possibly 4, or maybe even possibly 12, be a lot cheaper with being able to do that and looking for the funding on that. But I also still do think that we should put this as a priority, a federal priority, state and federal priority, because there's going to be grants, and I think that we shouldn't ignore the fact that there's going to be other homes that things grow that are going to need help. So I think that we are going to need, our future partners here to help us. Okay, we've stopped the bleeding, triaged it. We know where we're at, but it's not something that's going to finish, because we're going to continue to have to build on that. On top of that, I also want to figure out how do we, look, I was out there when I spoke to the Spanish-speaking family, okay, don't know a lick of English, right? They bought their beautiful home that they could afford in a place that is affordable underneath the flight path. I don't believe that people should line their pockets with money, okay, doing work they probably shouldn't have done, because they did work there before he bought the home in that backyard. So somebody needs to be responsible for future acquisitions of these homes, whether we do this on the ordinance, a policy. But I just don't think that real estate homeowners should get away with remodeling homes, lining their pocket, and then leaving the problem for us community members to have to deal with it after the mess is done. So I do believe that something needs to be put into place out there, and also not allowed to continue to have unpermitted work going on as we move forward from here. As the airport, and us being an airport community, there's already studies being shown that airport communities and airports are massive polluting systems. And so we should be talking to the port about figuring out what are we going to do with the underneath the flight path. There's one thing that we can do is some funding for stormwater, for acquisition of land underneath the flight path. So I do believe that that's something that we should be looking at and having those conversations with the port. With saying that, I know, Maya, you said that this may be where the council wants to go as being a public site. I believe that it was a study, and I believe that, at least in my position here today, speaking just as Jimmy Mata, I can tell you that my concern was I seen the severe flood and the havoc and the concern of some of those families that were having to live within that situation. So I said, in the spirit of making sure what is the problem, right? We've invested money in studying the problem. We know that, what the issue is. And I just don't think that it's something that, in my belief, that the city should come in and start having to do acquisitions of small lease of property, at least 40 properties. It's just too much work for our city. We can't afford it. And if that's where the council wants to go, then I want to get we've already known what the money that it would cost for it to happen. And of course, there's going to be cost overruns because it's nature. There is no plans with nature. You can't have an architect build you or an engineer build you plans. It's just not going to happen. So those are my 2 cents on this particular subject. So thank you very much. Council, is there any other? Go ahead, City Manager Wilson.
Just be helpful if council as a whole could express their support. I believe I have the majority to explore alternatives to what we presented tonight. Do I have everybody supportive of that? Okay.
Councilmember Schilling, Councilmember Moore. I mean, enjoy there. So
I'm good. Yep.
Okay, we got it. So we
All
got
right.
direction.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Russ, and well, she's not on, but anyway, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Shayla. Thank you.
Shaylee and Russell, just we had a lot of consultants come here, but I got to tell you, it was easy to walk through. The information was understandable. You were very, very well versed, and I want to thank you for just a well put together study that was done out there in Boulevard Park.
Well, your staff
Thank you.
worked really hard with us. And so a lot of it, Maya and Dan did a great job keeping us on track, on focus with what is of interest to you guys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Maya and Dan as well.